Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You're on the Steady Coach. Today, I'm here to share Chris's story of recovery from functional neurologic disorder, PPPD, and vestibular neuritis. Chris is also on the autism spectrum and very candidly in this interview shares some of the unique challenges he faced during recovery. The story is special in many ways, and I highly recommend watching it instead of just listening to it because there are some cool surprises along the way as you listen to this story. As always, it is such a delight to share his story, and it's especially a delight to know that these stories make an impact on you. So please share your questions, your comments in the comment section on YouTube. Give the video a like, share it, subscribe to my channel. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can join the comments on YouTube, and you can also follow the podcast and leave us a 5-star rating. All right, on to the story. Let's hear from Chris. Chris, welcome. We have been waiting for this moment, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. I can't believe it's been so long, but I've been looking forward to this moment for a long time. Believe me.
I know you have. Yes, although I will say that nothing tops the moment of actually getting to meet you in person, which I got to do in May, and I got to give you an actual hug and see how well you're doing nowadays in person. So this is just, for me, the cherry on top.
It feels like a real sense of achievement, and that moment in May was, I'll remember that for a very long time. It felt like the biggest win I've had in a long time, and it felt like a natural graduation moment, really. If that's the best way to describe it. And Pippa, I got to meet Pippa as well.
Yes, I have pictures.
I stepped into a hug from Pippa, and I think we were there for about 5 minutes.
I think you were. Yep. And I was just in the background. That we tell this story now. I was in the background crying, watching the two of you hugging. So it was a very intense situation. And I think we were laughing that if someone else had walked in, they'd have been like, what in the world is going on here? but it made sense to us. It was absolutely beautiful and totally appropriate given everything that you've gone through. So let's tell everyone the story. So maybe you want to start from the beginning and tell us how the symptoms got started.
So for me, they started with a bang, really. I woke up on the 29th of August 2020. I think a lot of people remember the day when this sort of thing starts. It's certainly in my journals. And the only way I can really describe it was like a roaring sound that began. And this was, I hadn't actually woken up. I was still in sleep mode. But I wasn't in dream state, but I could certainly hear a roaring sound. It wasn't tinnitus. It didn't sound like a tinnitus sound. But the best example I can remember of a parallel scenario was back in 2008 when we had an earthquake in the UK, which woke me up at 2:00 in the morning. And the bed I was in literally was shook. Now, in this instance, the same sort of sound. This time there was no bed shaking, but I noticed immediately a sensation of unusual movement that felt like spinning. I mean, rapid spinning. At this point in time, initially, I was still asleep, so I thought it was I didn't think it was my actual surroundings, but it was only when I opened my eyes and realized I was awake and the room was vertically spinning extremely fast. I realized something serious was wrong because I've never experienced anything like it. And I got that sensation where your throat starts to tighten. I remember thinking, I am going to throw up quite violently in a moment. I'm going to really be sick quite. But then I had a problem was that my bed is elevated. And I didn't know it, didn't realize there would be an issue at the point. I thought it was just severe spinning. I went to try and climb down the ladder to get to the bathroom. And I realized, hang on a second, I can't move. That my whole coordination wasn't there. I could move. I could move my arms and legs, but I couldn't coordinate anything. And I remember yelling and screaming at the top of my voice. And so my mum and my brother and my sister downstairs that something was seriously wrong. They came rushing in. My brother helped me down the ladder into the bathroom. And I remember staggering back after visiting the bathroom. And literally, I was fumbling around all over the place, just unable to keep. The room was rotating rapidly. I was in extreme state of terror. I had no idea what was going on. I said, I'm in trouble. Something's really, really wrong. I described this. The room is spinning. I think you're going to have to call an ambulance. And of course, the issue was as well, we were right in the middle of COVID when this happened as well.
Of course you were. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So they hit me with a bang, literally.
Yes.
I had no anticipation. I had no expectation it was going to happen. The only inkling that possibly something was going to happen was the night before when I climbed into bed. I felt a little sort of bump sensation or a little visual bounce happened in my head. I felt something physical go, like a jelly would just sort of wobble momentarily. But I dismissed that. It was so momentary. I thought, nah, nothing like that. And it was the next morning when I woke up that that's when everything really started, and that sort of fell apart from there.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, retrospectively, we know this was vestibular neuritis. How long did it take you to get that diagnosis?
So initially, the paramedics were called, and they said it was either BPPD or vestibular neuritis based on the symptoms. So there was probably an initial assessment pretty quickly. It wasn't formally diagnosed because I wasn't able to see a GP, so none of my medical notes actually confirm it. But various tests later on ruled out BPPV. So I had the rotary chair test and all the other tests that you go through, and they threw me back on the couch and sent me in different directions. So fun. Try and adjust the crystals. So really,
was there a residual weakness? Did they find weakness in your ear, or it had cleared up?
It seems to have cleared up. They couldn't find anything structural. The MRI scans when I had them found no structural damage other than I think there was a description of minor degenerative changes was on the medical record. But when I spoke to the doctor, he said that's a natural thing that happens, and he said it's nothing to worry about. It was suspected vestibular neuritis as opposed to actually confirmed by the paramedics based on what they saw.
Right. Okay.
And that was the same, more or less the same day, because they were called out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the typical course for vestibular neuritis is people feel just like you felt. They then go to vestibular therapy, and within a few months, they feel better. It just kind of gets better from there. That is not what happened to you.
No.
That is not what happened to you. So how long did it take from that initial big bang for you to realize I'm not getting better, and in fact, things are just getting worse?
It was probably about a month or 2 months in, when there were still residual symptoms and they started to change as well. So the spinning dizziness was easing off, but it was getting replaced by other symptoms or sensations, as I like to call them these days. Things like I would go to the sink to scrub some carrots, for instance, and the mere movement of rotating my wrists or arms or shoulders would seem to cause some kind of tilting sensation, or a simple act of peeling carrots at a sink. I was struggling to do. I was struggling with coordination, and I couldn't understand why. That was one example. Fairly early on, I was also getting some severe restlessness in my body. So I would wake up in the middle of the night, and an arm or a leg would feel like it was disconnected. Different to needles. So not what, I've had that before, where you slept on your arm and it wakes up numb, and then you get that sort of rush, don't you? And you get that cramp and you get that acute pain. This was different. There was none of that, but it was a sense of my arm felt like it wasn't connected, or I would lift it up and it would just want to flop back down again. It was like there was no sort of strength. It was almost like I suddenly lost the ability with the muscle, even though I could move it. It just didn't feel part of me. I got a sense of disconnection in my hips. So, for instance, I got a lot of restlessness in my. I would feel like the need to twitch my legs or shake them or try and wake them up, or as if there was something inside. Or sometimes you get like a crawling sensation under the skin, and I'd have to sort of almost sort of try and almost squeeze it out, almost as if it was, as if it was under. It wasn't in the bone or in the muscle, but it was under the skin. You're trying to wring something out that's sitting under the surface. So you get this sort of these sort of itches and these sort of strange sensations that are very difficult to describe, but something's still not quite right.
Oh yeah, to put it mildly. So it started with the spinning. Then you noticed it starting to morph. You started to feel this sense of being uncoordinated and disconnected from your body. And at this point, were you still able to work, or had it disrupted your life so much that you weren't really able to go do normal things anymore?
Oh, everything stopped really. I mean, we were in lockdown, so all the activities that I previously used to do were unavailable to me anyway. But from a work point of view, I initially had to call in sick and to explain to my line manager at the time what was wrong. I said, I don't really know exactly the diagnosis, but I described up the severe spinning. So they put it down initially as a vertigo attack, and I was signed off for about 7 to 10 days. The first doctor GP I spoke to, she gave me a what they call a fit note in the NHS, which basically gave the authority to sign me off. So that was for about 10 days. Sensations, the spinning resided. All the other symptoms that I've got a long list of were still evident. So I did try to return to work. At this point, I was still working from home full time, so I was still in front of my computer. So effectively, they'd already made some what you could call reasonable adjustments to my workstation and to work environment. And I mean, we were at my employer, we were all working from home at that point anyway. But it was just the ability to be able to perform even computer-based work that was a real struggle. Sometimes I couldn't even look at a screen. I would sit down in my chair, subtle movements would suddenly feel off balance. But sometimes I would sit down and everything would be normal. And then I'd go to walk around downstairs to the kitchen and the floor would feel like trampoline walking or walking on marshmallows. All things that I guess a lot of your previous success stories have always described and talked about. I'm going through exactly the same smorgasbord of all-you-can-eat buffet, if you want to describe it like that.
Of sensations.
Yeah.
So you found yourself increasingly debilitated, increasingly unable to work, trapped at home, essentially, because you're in lockdown. And you had really a smorgasbord of sensations, because you also had some that people have not talked about as much. Because ultimately, this is, I guess, a bit of a preview, you were diagnosed with functional neurologic disorder. So you had some extra special ones. Do you maybe want to share that list, since you have a list of the sensations?
I do have a list, yeah. So here we go. It's in, I mean, no particular order, but these are the sort of the symptoms I experienced. So it started at the top. We've talked about the vestibular neuritis, which I was ultimately given triple PD as one of the diagnoses. So a doctor did confirm that I had triple PD. But there were times when I was actually unable to stand up, and I would have total loss of balance. So trying to walk around, I would get drop attacks. Was the one that was probably the one that a lot of people with triple PD haven't, with neural circuit dizziness, may not have experienced. The drop attacks really started in around about May 2022. That was when I started to venture out from home to try and get back into the office, because people at my workplace had already started returning to the office. I was still working from home. So I remember trying to have a go at getting to the office. The walk to the railway station takes about 25 minutes. And I remember the walk there, it's undulating in places. Some places are flat, but there are some hills as well. And the way in which I was walking didn't feel normal. It's like, you know, I can describe it was, there used to be an advert in the 80s for mints. There was a guy called Mr. Softy, and he used to have this swagger of a walk. I think, and I remember one of your other success stories talking about the same experience, and it was literally like my hips would sway out in different directions. My knees or my legs were going all in different directions. So there was no coordination whatsoever. And I do remember one drop attack I had when I actually went to see the neurologist at the Alexandra Hospital, he was the one who actually diagnosed me. And he said,
with FND or PPPD?
With FND. So
with FND.
Professor Mark Roberts was the neurologist who I saw privately. And he was the one who ultimately described, who gave me the diagnosis. I had 2 visits to Mark Roberts at the Alexandra. The first one went through all the symptoms and everything I'd experienced, and that passed off with no incident. Funnily enough, I was with my mum at the time. He sent me for the MRI scan, the brain and the full spine, and it was the second visit back where the collapse occurred, and it started. I remember I got a pulling sensation in the hips, and I felt like my legs suddenly felt 3 times as heavy, and trying to stand up was almost impossible. Throwing visual vertigo on top of that, and so you were getting the goldfish ball effect, as I often described, or the whole, like going to a hall of mirrors experience. You know, when your vision just changes. So throw on top of that derealization and dissociation, and a feel of a disconnection from your surroundings, and also I started crying. There was clearly some kind of emotional effect going on where I felt a shaking in my spinal cord, like some kind of distress was trapped in my body. So I was starting to get what some would regard as panic attack symptoms. I don't think it was an actual panic attack, but I did what I've often done when these attacks occur. But the first thing you do is you put your hands out and you grab for whatever wall or surface you can try and steady yourself on. It's a bit like if you ever go ice skating for the first time, isn't it? You see people who are starting out all grabbing onto the sides trying to stay up. It was that kind of desperation to stay upright. But in this instance, you're talking about an environment where normally you would naturally walk around in, and here I lost all sense of ability to stand up. My body just basically wanted to hit the floor, and my body felt 4 or 5 times as heavy. And that was the one they took a wheelchair for me and wheeled me into Professor Roberts' consultation room. And that's when he said, yes, that what I'm seeing is consistent with functional neurological disorder. And he said, yeah, your balance is for someone in their early 40s is not where it should be.
Yeah, also very understated.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I mean, I had other on the list here. I had the ears feeling full sensation on the left-hand side in particular. So I had a sense of pressure on my left ear, which I thought was possibly congestion related, but it felt, even though I wasn't congested, I still felt a sense of the air pressure on the left-hand side didn't feel stabilized. It's almost as if there was a restriction in the inner ear. I had sensation of swaying in all directions, sense of being spaced out. This one developed slightly later. This was throbbing pulses in the back of my head, the base of my skull, in what the osteopath calls the occiput area, and which, you know, if you have a muscular injury, it's easy to get to. If it's a knee or a calf injury, you know, you can get a foam roller out and possibly massage away the knot or whatever it is. In my case, I had some kind of neck pressure, the base of the skull, right under the occiput area that you couldn't easily get to. That the osteopath who I started seeing, he would slowly work into that muscular area, because my condition is a bit more complicated than just pure mind-body, because it also had some musculoskeletal structural issues, but not so much in the sense of an acute physical injury. They kind of developed out of the lockdown situation that I was in at the time. So, and this is where it crosses over. It's still my body, but the boundary between and the distinction in the ability to identify whether it is pure mind body or musculoskeletal, because the symptoms are the same, was very difficult to identify. So in the initially I was working from home on the desktop that I'm on now. I was given a laptop from work, and I thought I needed a boundary, a mental boundary between my personal computer and my workstation. So I started using the laptop that I was given. It was probably around about January 2021 I'd made that decision. So I had a different desk to the one I'm using now, and a different chair to the one I'm using now. And I was leaning forward an awful lot, so the posture over the laptop, right. I had no idea this was a thing. So one of the issues that developed was forward head syndrome, that the osteopath identified. He said, because you've been sat hunched over a laptop, he explained about the weight of the head and the neck pressure. So he said, what's happened is you've lost the strength in your upper trapezius muscles to hold your head forward. Yes. So I was getting the head bobbing movement. But
so people should understand here that these things all feed into each other. And what I hesitate with this is that people will sometimes just get so ultra focused on trying to fix a forward head posture issue when that's not what needs to happen for them to get better. Although we do want you to be healthy, and we want you to have good posture, and we want you to have strong muscles. People focus on that without focusing on any of the other things that you've actually had to do to get better, because none of those things that you described right now, all the work you did with the osteopath, you went to PT, you worked with a lot of conventional practitioners for a while. And of course they could address those musculoskeletal issues, but the root issue of the functional neurologic disorder was not being addressed by those things. So it becomes a vicious cycle, because then you're also uncoordinated and you're out of balance, you're having drop attacks. So your body does this naturally. You're trying to protect yourself. And then that makes the whole physical side of things worse. So I'm curious if, so you were diagnosed with functional neurologic disorder in 2022. And at that point, at what point, I guess my question is, at what point did you realize I'm going to need to do more than these physical solutions?
I think it was probably about 12 months in when.
Oh gosh. You were living in absolute hell. I
realized that that I was doing everything that my physical, the osteopath and the physiotherapist I was seeing, I was doing all the exercises that they were giving to me. And here was the other issue as well, is that each time I would go and see the osteopath or the physiotherapist, and they would give me a new set of exercises to do, but you would build on the previous one as well. So you end up with a very long list of exercises that you have to do, and that in itself starts to put pressure on you from a time point of view, because you haven't. They say do these eye exercises 3 times a day, 10 sets in each direction, for example. And I guess if you're not working at the time, it is a little bit easier because you do have the time to do them all. But when you're trying to fit in recovery exercises around a full-time job that you're still doing, that time window suddenly presses down, and you suddenly would think, well, when I start to add up all these exercises that the osteopath, the physiotherapist, and the clinical psychologist are all giving to me, I'm thinking this suddenly starts to fit. And also, I was also experimenting, going via Dr. Google, looking at alternative solutions of my own. So, I would look to see what are other people doing to get themselves better. And I came across Wim Hof at a fairly early stage. So I thought, okay, I'll do some Wim Hof breathing. I'm thinking, well, if I'm doing the Wim Hof breathing, I've also got to do these upper arm exercises, strengthening exercises. I've got to put some planking. I've got to do some Tai Chi exercises. I've got to do some yoga, some basic yoga. And
you were also tracking your symptoms this whole time. Do you want to show everyone the journals?
I do. So if I pick, hopefully they don't fall over, this will give you some idea of
that. Is just so we're clear, guys, this is not journaling like feelings. This is journaling keeping track of symptoms. Wow.
So I started in around about 2020 with the journaling. The method that you see there is something called bullet journaling, because as I'm on the autism spectrum, so one of the things I'm trying to do is be a little bit more self-organized. And the method that I discovered was called the bullet journal method, or BooJourn method, by a guy called Ryder Carroll. And it does help you to be more organized. But I think it was also the way that I was using the bullet journal as well started to feed into the very start of my symptoms, because that first journal at the top there, you saw the red one, I started around about June 2020, which is actually before my symptoms. I started it, I think actually it might be a bit earlier, close into in the very first lockdown. But one thing I was doing as well was I was starting to track my health with different apps. And this wasn't health anxiety, but it was probably bordering into a bit of OCD. I bought a blood pressure machine. And one of the reasons for that was because of my autism, I hated having my blood pressure checked. For some reason, it was one of the things that would make me faint for some reason. So my GP said, why don't you get yourself your own blood pressure machine? And I got one that looks like
this was before the symptoms, everyone, just so we're clear, before symptoms.
So then I got an app, and and the app also had another device, and so you could add these tiles, for different tiles to measure all different metrics of your body. And I started to get a bit obsessed with this. And I then went and bought a sleep mat. So, because you could add all these extra different devices to track all these different metrics.
Right.
And
So you can see you were building vigilance, body vigilance already. And so when the symptoms started, you had all that infrastructure already in place for your brain to just go, okay, we got to track everything. We got to track every sensation.
It started out as as a good intention, and then it became a bit of an obsession. I don't necessarily think it was what set off the initial vestibular neuritis, but clearly I was building an unhealthy habit of monitoring my health. So certainly, by the time the symptoms but the first vestibular neuritis attack occurred, I was then starting to actively use the journal to write down exactly what was happening. So for about 2.5 years, I was tracking symptoms in some detail. And obviously, being on the autism spectrum, you tend to focus on every single little detail, and you start marking symptoms out of 10, for instance, or you identify, well, how long have I had these symptoms for? So you start tracking the metrics again. Yes. But so I would say, certainly through 2020, I was seeing my symptoms 24/7 easily.
24/7 symptoms. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And that, I mean, again, everything that you're saying, I think is going to resonate with people, because so many people end up doing a lot of the same things, maybe for different reasons, but they see the practitioners, they end up doing the exercises. Doing the exercises becomes a full-time job. They're getting worse, not better. They're tracking their symptoms, and it just keeps going. So I guess what I'm curious about is, at what point did you realize this is not actually getting me better? I need to try a different tactic.
Well, it kind of happened by accident, because certainly whilst I was at home, I would have the journal in front of me open every day, and I'd be logging everything that I was doing, including all the exercises. So I was recording what symptoms I was having, how severe they were. And I was also adding, okay, I'm doing the exercises I've been prescribed. How different do I feel now? But I wasn't really seeing much improvement. For best part of 2020, 21, 22, I would say my symptoms were between 100 to 80%. There were little respites, but by and large, I was living in a bit of a nightmare. My brain was in a living hell. But I would put the journal into my bag with me to observe things as they happened when I went out and about. But what happened was, when I got home, sometimes I would forget the journal and I would leave it in the bag. And that wasn't intentional. It was just a bit absent-minded. So I started to get to a point where I wasn't tracking symptoms every single day in my journal. It wasn't a case of a conscious decision. I suddenly realized, I've not tracked my symptoms today. I'll do it tomorrow. Or I'd forget where I'd put my journal and find it 4 days later. And maybe in that time, perhaps my sensations had dropped, but I had no way of tracking it. But then I'd pick the journal up again and I'd write it, what symptoms were. And I did notice that when I was writing down what symptoms I was experiencing and scoring them, it almost brought them into sharp focus. And it seemed like the volume dial was being turned up. The awareness was there. And then I would spend the rest of the day being aware of the symptoms, the sensations, and not really knowing what to do about them, and feeling like I was back to how I was previously. So sure. I guess subconsciously, there was an awareness, hang on a second. So maybe I wasn't acutely aware of it at the time, but that mere breaking of a habit, albeit inadvertently, was probably the start of sensation starting to wane ever so slightly.
Okay. So you started noticing that, and that sparked some curiosity maybe, or a willingness to look outside of what you were already doing. So you started learning about the idea that this could be a neural circuit problem. And I know there's probably a lot of detail here. Maybe you can describe for us the day when you realized, oh, this is a neural circuit problem, and I'm going to need to look at my emotions and how I think in order to get better.
So I guess the emotional side of it didn't come apparent straight away. But what I did notice was that even during lockdown, we were encouraged to get outside and go for short walks. My mum initially was hesitant in allowing me to walk very far. She was very concerned that if I went out for a walk for more than 20 minutes or so before, that something would happen and she'd get very worried. So my mum's a natural worrier as well, as all mothers do. And so her view was, go for a walk 10, 15 minutes maximum, but no more. But there's a walking route near to my home, which is a route I've taken to the station for the last 10 years before everything kicked off. And at one point, you walk across the top of a dam. And I ended up calling this my reset walk, because I started to notice at that point, I'd walk down this zigzag path that would lead to the top of the dam, and then I'd walk across the dam, and it's about 90 to 100 meters across. And what it also allowed me to do was one thing I naturally used to do was I'd look across into the distance towards Manchester. And it was a good opportunity to get sort of relax your eyes. And as I started to learn about how if you spend a long time at screens, that it really puts a lot of strain on a set of muscles, whereas when you look into the distance, it relaxes those muscles and it engages the other set of eye muscles that haven't been used for a while. So there was probably something in that I was giving a part of my body that was overworked a chance to relax. But what was interesting was I would walk across that the top of the dam. I'd get to the side and I'm like, I don't remember noticing anything, any symptoms. I would have what you would now regard as a symptom-free moment. And for a long period in 2022, that was perhaps the only time that I was symptom-free. So, I'd go from 100% symptoms down to about, let's call it 90%, let's say. But at least there's a moment of respite. And then walking back home, they would initially still have that sense of no symptoms, but then they would kick in again about halfway along as I was heading back to the house. So
clear neural circuit signs. Yep.
Very clear. Yeah. Now, very obviously, clear. There was a lot going on at home in my family circle. A lot of high emotionally charged things going on with my mum and my sister and my brother at the time, and me, and throw in work stress and pressures and so forth. So
it makes sense.
It makes sense that you're going back to a place that is now a very confused place, because whereas it was previously a place of home relaxation, it's kind of becoming a bit of a place of chaos, because my body and my brain can't work out what that place is supposed to be. Is it a workplace? Is it a home? Is it a peaceful place?
Yes.
Is there the dynamics and so on? So everything's disrupted. So there's a lot of alarms going off. And so I'm aware now, having read Dr. Russell Kennedy's book, Anxiety RX, about the whole concept of alarms going off in the body.
Yes.
But obviously at the time, I wasn't armed with that knowledge.
So, Chris, when did you join the coaching group? I couldn't remember if it was late 2023 or if it was early 2024.
So it was early. It was. I've got my notes here somewhere. When I actually joined, I think it was beginning of 2023.
Beginning of 2023. We've known each other for that long. Oh my gosh!
So early. So on my journey to, so I've got my success. Like key dates are all in front of me here.
Okay.
So I've got. It goes right the way back to April the 5th, 2019, when I had the formal autism spectrum diagnosis. And that probably feeds into a lot of the
absolutely. Yes.
And actually, before we get to that date, there's a couple of dates here that feed up to 30th of August. So I've got it as 30th of August.
On 2023?
30th of August 2020 was when everything changed.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yep. And then the coaching group date, the date you joined.
The date I joined. I've got it down as. There we go. So I joined the VIP coaching group 22nd of July 23.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So over 2 years ago.
Yeah. But that was 5th of January 2023. I started the free course.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep.
So I think, so what I remember at the time thinking, do I dive straight into the paid course or do I go to the VIP group and subscribe? And I know how I've been like in the past where I've gone and paid out for a subscription, say gym, for instance, and not used it. And I thought, no, I think what I will do first, I'll make sure that I do the free course. And I know that I get into that habit of doing something, committing to it and getting into a good habit. So when I started your free course in January, I followed it on a week-to-week basis, and I realized, right, okay, I'm starting to make progress. But I was struggling to about 2/3 of the way, and I thought, it's the last mile of recovery, I think was the way we termed it. I'm thinking, I'm making progress, but I'm still getting sensations. I'm still feeling off balance. I'm still getting drop attacks when I go out in the street. At this point in time, I was seeing a counsellor about my sexuality, my identity, and all those some really personal stuff going on. I mean, I remember one occasion. I was now going out and about in Manchester, having gone to see Phil in a small town called Lee, which is east of Manchester. Coming back on the bus, feeling a little bit in the hip sensations going off. I'm thinking, not sure about this. I managed to get off the bus, crossed over the road there's a big square in the centre of Manchester called St. Peter's Square, where all the trams interchange. And I got to the tram stop, and my legs went. I managed to grab hold of some railings, and I couldn't move. And I was on the floor outside the tram stop. And that was sometimes in those scenarios, I've had drop attacks where I've been able to get up and I've had them at home, for instance, or I've had them in the doctor's surgery and I've made a relatively quick recovery and I haven't had to go to A&E. But in this instance, when you're on the cold, hard ground, it's the middle of November, you're not getting out of this one. You're not walking away from this one. And literally from the point I was on the floor at that point, my whole body shuts down. I can't move my arms, can't move my legs. I can see and hear what's going on, but I can't speak. So that was an emergency room job. So I had about a dozen of those from about March 2022 until for about early 2024. I think they started to ease off.
Yep, they did. I remember. Because when you joined the group, you were still having them. They weren't as frequent, but I remember initially, so you said you joined in sort of the middle of the year, 2023. You were still at that point, you were getting braver with what you were doing. In fact, maybe we don't want to go into too much detail here, but I very clearly remember the comic. I don't know that it's not called Comic Con, but they're comic. The
Little Comic Con convention.
Little Comic Con. Okay.
In October 2023.
Yes, I remember. And you had one then. I remember. That's
yes,
right.
I went to the Comic Con dressed as the Pink Power Ranger, and to meet one of my childhood idols, Amy Jo Johnson. At the time, I was still suffering from floating head sensations and disorientation. So, and it would randomly kick in at any time. So I had no idea how I would be on a train. I was still getting sensations on a train at this point, or in busy railway stations. Sometimes if I sat down on a train, once I was sort of seated, my body would calm down again. That was something I noticed as well. That was clear neural circuit dizziness, was that there would be points where I was sat down just casually looking out the window and everything would feel normal. And it was only when I would come to sort of walk and move again that I was starting to get disorientated. What I did notice was interesting was when I had to get from Liverpool Lime Street, which is the main railway station in Liverpool, to the convention, I had to use the Merseyrail Underground, and that involved going down a set of escalators, down a set of steps, and it's quite a zigzag of a route, for want of a better description. It's quite convoluted, lots of narrow passageways. But getting down onto the platform, I don't remember feeling any sensation. I'm thinking, how was that possible? I got off the train, I made my way down onto the lower level of Lime Street Station. It's an underground station, and I've made it to the convention center. I've got on a train, off again, and walked to the convention center. And yet my sensations seem to have tailed off, although they were having some, you could call it a quiet period, I don't know. But my theory behind that was that possibly Liverpool as a city or a place has no connection with my daily life. So I was possibly disconnected from a location that my brain had come to associate with all my stress or my neurological conditions.
Mm-hmm. This happens to people a lot when they travel. They're just like, "What? It's so weird. It felt different, felt better."
Except for the moment when I'd already been in the auditorium and met Amy Jo Johnson at the Q&A, but I hadn't gone into for the photograph session or the actual autograph stalls. And I was making my way from the arena to the halls where all the celebs are all based. And I'd walked into the main, it's a large exhibition hall. Imagine a sports hall, but probably... Sure. So these large exhibition spaces,
yes.
Sort of like a huge warehouse kind of setup. Whether it was the noise, whether it was the people moving around, whether it was the central overload, I don't know. And I started to think, could do with a sit down at this point. And I remember also feeling a bit of pressure in the hips. I was carrying a bag with me at the time with my change of clothing in and a whole load of stuff that I'd taken to get autographed as well. So my bag wasn't the lightest, which possibly played into it. And I remember thinking, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed in this space. I need to sort of go and find somewhere I can sit down and have a bit of quiet. And I walked out of, staggered, because I could feel my knees starting to go already. And they didn't really have any seating. So I remember sitting on the floor by the side of one of the entrances to the exhibition hall. It connects with the main, sort of like a connecting corridor, where there are some side stalls. And initially, somebody else in cosplay came up who was in a blue Power Ranger outfit, and we were talking. And I remember my brain thinking, I'm struggling to carry on the conversation. It was the brain fog was kicking in at this point. And I remember sort of saying, I don't feel too good. And sort of looking to my right and just sort of keeling over. It was just sort of, it was almost like it was done in slow motion. And I remember putting my hands on, I was already sat down on the floor at the time. I remember putting my hands on the floor and then trying to get up, and I physically couldn't get up. And this was about 5 minutes later, the medics came over and they wheeled me into, they had a medical room that's set aside for these sorts of events. And so then you had the fun of, I was in full pink Power Ranger outfit. They basically had to unzip the back of the outfit, and then I had to pull the sleeve down so they could get the cuff on to take a blood pressure reading. But there's also this sight of a pink Power Ranger in a wheelchair being wheeled into a medical. This isn't great for the street cred.
That's not. I'm just listen. I just want to point something out here. Anyone who's listening to this is probably noticing this, but your resilience is ridiculous. I mean, so in our stories on the channel, we're often talking about dips. What you're describing is what someone might call a dip, right? In PPPD, usually a dip just looks like I feel bad, and you may feel even like worse than bad, catastrophically bad, housebound bad. Chris, you were having these drop attacks in very conspicuous public places, and you still managed to keep going. It was remarkable to see at the time, and the payoff we're going to talk about next, because it actually did pay off. Those things stopped happening, but at the time, you were already in the group. I remember hearing the story and just going, he is so resilient. It's just unbelievable. So,
well, it's one of the things I noticed was I think sometimes when you have a purpose, when there's something that you are wanting to set out to do, whether it's go to a Comic-Con convention or go to the loo somewhere. I mean, this was an alternative. I'd be in the interchange, the local bus station in Ashton, which is the nearest town to where I live, and sometimes I'd have to change bus, or I'd have to change for the tram. And I remember thinking, right, I really need to go to the loo at this point, and I would go off, cross over to the adjacent shopping centre, go and find the bathroom. And
thank you for translating for our American audience members.
Yeah.
Although we have a bunch of Brits on our channel now, so I mean, hopefully people are learning the lingo. But yeah,
we call it the loo, but loo, bathroom, whatever. But
loo makes more sense. I mean, bathroom. Who's taking a bath in the bathroom? I mean, it's just
But it was the fact that I was able to go and come back and make the natural movements to walk there and back. That and looking back and thinking, I don't remember any sensations at that point. And I bounced across a bit as well. That I remember the time I caught COVID, I still had symptoms. But all the NCD sensations seemed to go into the background. They almost weren't there, and all my body was doing was focusing on fighting the virus. And even when I had a cold which wasn't COVID, I had a typical common cold. And I remember that one again. Sensations went away.
Yes.
And my body was like, okay, I need to get to the bathroom now. Go and do all the things that you do. Make yourself a drink to sort of get the fluids going. All that kind of stuff. When I was doing it, sensations would temporarily ease off. Sometimes they were there as well, but I definitely noticed they weren't as prominent as when I had a cold or when I had COVID.
Yes. So what I want to do now, if it's okay with you, I want to fast forward because I don't want to shortchange people who are listening on the work that you and Pippa did together. So you were in the group, you were having, again, especially initially, you were still having these kinds of events, not to mention the background symptoms. Things were progressively getting better. You were having fewer attacks. The symptoms were starting to go down. And then you decided you needed a little more help. And Pippa had availability. And so the two of you started working together. So I'm wondering if you can tell people what that looked like. So what kind of work that actually was.
So Pippa uses a form of therapy called Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, or AEDP. I didn't know much about it at the time. And I thought...
Is it okay if I just tell people a little bit about what that is, AEDP? Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with it, Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy is a technique that is very emotion focused. And you've heard me talk about on my channel a lot how feeling emotions is part of the recovery process for reasons I'm not going to go into in this conversation. But AEDP has a particular way of doing it that aligns it with memory reconsolidation principles. That's something else I've talked about on the channel a lot. I will link to an interview in the video description that describes why AEDP works as well as it does. And it's not about AEDP, it's about memory reconsolidation. So the reason Pippa uses this particular technique is she's amazing at it, as I'm sure you're going to mention. She's it just fits her like a glove. Her natural style is so warm and loving and caring, so it just fits her. But also, it's powerful and it works to help people change their brains. That's exactly what it does. So, thank you for letting me interrupt you, Chris. Why don't you go ahead with what you were going to say now?
Yeah. Oh, first of all, forget it was an absolute privilege working with Pippa. I mean, she is unlike any therapist I have ever worked with. And she actually connects with you. That was the first thing that I noticed, the difference between some therapies, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, and particularly the way it's done in the NHS. I've got to diss the NHS at this point because unfortunately I've had some terrible experiences on the NHS with mental health support. I won't criticize the NHS completely because from an A&E point of view, from a physical health point of view, the ambulance would turn up pretty quick. So the doctors would look after me. But when it came to certain types of treatment, certainly from a mental health point of view, cognitive behavioral therapy was the standard that the NHS used, and it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So and also the therapists tend to be very distant. They don't tend to connect with you. They don't tend to build up a relationship with you. There's like a boundary that they create. And sometimes when you're dealing with particularly very emotional subjects and things that clearly have affected you, you need that little bit of extra empathy. And that's the thing that Pippa also brings in bucket loads is empathy.
She's so empathic.
Connects with you. She's a very compassionate person. She wears her heart on her sleeve.
Yes, she does.
And she's very skilled in the way that she can in a very professional way, but very personal way, connect with you. And she gets to the heart of what is bothering with you. Sometimes it takes a while to get there. But she always made sure that at the end of any session we work with, if I'd got into a vulnerable state, she gets me into a position where I'm not feeling vulnerable, where I'm not feeling distressed, because that can be the danger with a therapy session, is especially when it ventures into certain very personal subjects, especially if it's sexual in nature or anything like that, that can bring up a lot of trauma that you can put somebody into a dysregulated state. And if you end the session with someone in a dysregulated state, that can potentially be quite dangerous. But with Pippa's approach, she is absolute. She makes sure that when you go into an area which is triggering a lot of emotional experiences that are potentially extremely traumatic for you, she's there with you. And she says that she makes that really, really clear, that when you start exploring a scenario that is related to your trauma, that is in your stress bucket, that is clearly fueling your neural circuit dizziness, Pippa comes with you to explore that scenario. And that's one of the differences between standard talking therapy, where you describe what happened to a therapist and they will listen and they will ask you what you think, but they don't necessarily go to that situation with you or help you change the narrative. In Pippa's case, it's changing a narrative. So one example that we worked on was a bullying situation where I'd been the subject of it was more than name calling by a group of youths for about 6 years. And it was incessant on a daily basis on the housing estate where I used to live. We basically, Pippa asked me how old I was in that situation. She took me to that situation, but Pippa said, I'm coming with you, but also you, your adult self, you're going to accompany your 12-year-old person to that situation, because clearly this is when I started to become a bit more understanding about how we have parts in our body and our brain, and that we have child parts, we have adult parts, and sometimes, especially with trauma, you can have multiple parts that are present, and they don't necessarily align, or one can shout up and say, I'm feeling distressed, and it's that I'm feeling distressed that then translates itself into whichever sensation he decides to pick from that smorgasbord we talked about before. So we visited that situation, but Pippa got me to take control by confronting the group. And this is really where the superhero story starts to come into play.
Okay, so you and Pippa are now in the middle of this portrayal. You're back there to confront the bullies.
Basically, the superhero part of it began because of my 6-year-old self that was feeling extremely distressed, and I was looking for pictures of superheroes giving hugs to somebody in my age. I started looking for Power Rangers because I was so into those. And there's a site, there's an artwork site online that I discovered, and the first picture I came across that really stood out to me was Supergirl hugging a teenager, and it just suddenly spoke to me. And this artist produced dozens and dozens of these images, And each one I looked at, I was connecting with the artwork, and it was starting to tell a story. But also, I have a 6-year-old part and a teenage part, and the teenage part is comfortable with the Power Rangers because with the helmet, but my 6-year-old needs to read faces, and the only problem with the Power Ranger outfit is you can't see the hero's face, whereas with Supergirl you can, and hence the character. I mean, that was the. I ended up going online and buying this little character on Etsy, and she arrived around about April 2024.
And now I got my own Wonder Woman in May when we saw each other.
And but going back to the AEDP exercise, Pippa actually got me to step into whatever personality I felt needed to confront the situation. And that's really where I looked deep into what did my inner child need at that point to challenge that situation. And the whole superhero story and the whole superhero theme became front and center of my situation, and I guess really began to build the platform for my recovery. It was almost like it was a big part of my childhood, and so Pippa actually got me to ask myself, look internally, which character, which superhero did I need to be at that point to comfortably challenge that group? And Supergirl was jumping out at me. So Pippa actually got me to actually go into that scenario and transform into Supergirl herself and challenge the group directly. So in that situation, we did the whole shut rip open thing. Just like that. It has to be done.
It has to be done.
I don't eat my shirt anymore, by the way. Even though in the TV series she does actually say, that's my favorite shirt. That one has been
You decided not to use your favorite shirt for this one.
I decided not to use my favorite shirt for that. But for pretty much all 9 of the one-to-one therapy sessions I had with Pippa, Supergirl featured. We ended up in the example with the bullies. I would confront them and I would start aggressively, verbally challenging them. But I would also use, because Pippa's approach is you can kick them if you want to, you can punch them, you can be as violent to them as if you want to. And I guess that knowing the Supergirl character, I didn't want to sort of kill them. I just decided I wanted to dispense justice in the style that she would do it. It did involve imaginary heat vision and a bit of super breath and a bit of the cartoon. Yeah, there was a bit of cartoon kind of blowing ice onto the floor so they couldn't stand up, and you get the cartoon legs going, sort of sending the sport. And it sounds fun, and part of it is, but there's also a serious side as well, that you are entering into a situation that caused extreme distress at the time, and you are rewriting the narrative.
Yes. Yep. Memory reconsolidation. Yep. Right there. And Chris, this has had an unbelievable impact on you. So it's not just about emptying the stress bucket, which I'm so glad that you mentioned, because that we talk about that a lot. There are things in your bucket, past stressors, that are affecting how you relate to stress and other things now. So we need to do something with those things. But in the process of doing something with those things, we're not just taking stress out of the bucket. We're changing you in letting you be more of who you really are, is how I think about it.
Well,
So yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think one of the things I wanted to say as well is it was a realization I came to. I don't think it was necessarily in the AEDP practices, but it was during the time that I started venturing out as well, was that I realized that I would recover faster by actually going outside of my home and getting out and about and doing the things that I used to do.
Yes.
Because when I had my drop attacks at home, because it would happen at home, and I would collapse on the beanbag behind me and cry my eyes out, for example, or I would go into this blubbery wreck where I'm on the floor and literally unable to move. And there came a realization where I thought, well, if this happens at home and I'm staying at home, this is just going to continue. Whereas I thought, if I go outside, out and about, yes, it might happen whilst I'm out in public, but maybe I might, if it does happen, I might actually get some of the extra help that I need where I'm not getting the help, which turned out to be the case, because I did manage to get appointments with a functional neurological disorder clinic, an FND clinic, as part of the recovery process and as part of the toolkit that I was starting to use. And that sat nicely alongside the work I was doing with Pippa.
Yes. And I think for my understanding of the work that you did there was really just solidifying that this was what was happening, and that by changing the alarm signals that you talked about earlier via the work with Pippa, and also challenging yourself to go out and do things and caring for yourself differently, that's the thing that I really see as having changed the most, that this could be resolved.
I do think as well, if I had to pick one key part of my recovery, it was definitely the one-to-one work I did with Pippa. I think without the sessions I had with Pippa, without the AEDP, where we went through about 9 different scenarios related to my childhood, there was a lot of focus on an abandoned inner child, which I didn't realize had been abandoned. There was elements of related to my immediate family where the abandonment occurred, which sounds strange because my parents didn't necessarily abandon me as a child. I grew up with them in the household, so it wasn't like they kicked me out onto the street or anything like that. But I think it was the fallout from their divorce that psychologically scarred me in a massive way, more than I realized at the time. But I've had various instances of trauma going right the way back to the age of 6, and probably the very first one was this wasn't abandoned.
Well, let's focus on what you did with Pippa, because I know we're going to have to close soon, and people I know are going to be like, they're going to hear this and they're going to be like, what did Chris do? Like, can you maybe summarize? So the work with Pippa was essential, right? And then exposure, going out and doing things that you really cared about. You mentioned that things that you valued or that were important to you. Anything else that you want to mention? Because I kept thinking about the walk runs that you started doing. I think that's worth mentioning. Yeah.
And I think that really started from, I was watching one of your success stories. It was Stephen's story. And he spoke about going out and running until he was sticking to the ground, I think were the words he used. And there was some message in what he was saying that I thought, I used to really enjoy running, and if he can recover through going back to doing something like that, the running, then I just really connected with what he was saying. So I started to slowly build it back into my routine again, because I used to run regularly on a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Sunday run. I did that regularly, and I started to realize that when I was building back in the things that I used to do, it was filling blocks in my brain that were missing. It was saying that because I'd lost these parts to me that I was familiar with, my body and my brain had replaced them with the dizzy channels. And so by gradually going back to, say, the running, and the yoga was the other one I restarted again. And I'm a member of Bannatyne's gym, and in my brain, when I go into a yoga studio, my brain says, "Oh, I'm in a happy place now." And so it's identifying locations, places you go that you would call your happy place, and
doing it and being willing to go. I have to just say, Chris, I mean, not just willing to go. When you said, listen, I'm having these attacks at home, maybe it'll actually be better to do it in public. I mean, again, that's so resilient of you. And I know that not everyone's going to be able to do what you just described, but there was a component of adventurousness and acceptance, I think, that went into that. That if people can bring a little bit more of that into their recovery process, I always say it's not really about what you're doing, but about how you're doing it. So you identified things that were meaningful to you. You went into them just saying, I'm going to let go and let what happens happen, while also focusing on the things that matter to me. Those are the kinds of things that send a safety signal.
Well, for example, with yoga, when I first joined Bannatyne's, I remember being very anxious about walking into the gym, even into the reception, because I still had quite a few balance issues. I remember getting some floating sensations, because I'd gone in and said, I'm thinking about starting my membership. Could I have a tour of the gym, as if I was a new member? And I remember struggling to follow the rep around, and going into the gym, into the changing rooms, and feeling floating headedness and head bobbling and a little bit of wobbling. I'm thinking, oh, I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing. Fast forward to my first yoga practice, and I was definitely drifting in and out of those sensations. The key issue I was struggling with was the balance. But the message of safety that was coming through was, I remember when I used to practice yoga, I would wobble around, balance would be a bit off, and you'd kind of laugh about it, or you kind of joke with the instructor about it, and you'd be like, well, it's all wobbling around in a yoga posture while you're strengthening is all part of the rebuilding process in your body, in that sense of you're actually getting strong and healthier. So there was almost a sense of just going with the flow, and if you fall over or wobble when you're in yoga practice, well, everybody else is, so what's different? And I guess there was that mindset change.
That's it. Big change
during that period, and almost an acceptance that a sensation or a symptom would be present, but you change your relationship with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Chris, you are just describing the process so beautifully. And I was wondering if you had any specific advice before we close today. If you have any specific advice for people out there who are going through this right now?
I do.
Okay, please.
I put a whole lot of bullet points.
Okay,
so I've got
please. Yes.
So
let's do it.
it's in no particular order, this, by the way. And they get, so one isn't necessarily more important than the other. But I mean, one of the key things was I learned that dizziness is a call to action. It was sort of one. That's
something I said recently.
Yeah, it's something you said recently. And from the moment you said it, it really struck a chord with me that it's my body and my brain's way of telling me something in my life needs to change, or there's something that I haven't done that I need to look at. So that's through the journaling and saying, is it? So one of the things I've started doing is getting on a train and traveling 3 hours to Cardiff, for instance, and just doing some creative writing. And so it's things like, maybe it's a side of my brain that hasn't been exercised for a while, because maybe the logic side of the brain spends a lot of time in action, and maybe the other side of the brain, the creative side, is, well, you've not been using me right, so I'm going to make you dizzy. So instead of me making you dizzy, if you get creative, I won't make you dizzy. That's the way I put it.
There's actually a fascinating theory out there. I don't know if you are even aware of this, Chris, but what you just described is actually a fascinating theory in neuroscience that's well regarded. So I'm not going to go into it, obviously, but I think you're onto something about this.
So bullet point 2, you'll develop a relationship with your dizziness, and you'll find that there's a moment of transition where you'll view your sensations not with fear, but with acknowledgement, that you say, okay, they're there. You don't necessarily brush them off, but it's a record. Say, okay, it's my body's way of telling me something. Especially when you get to a point where sensations disappear and they come back again. That's when you realize, that it's not. I know that I can move around comfortably. So the fact that you're having quiet periods, it gets a bit frustrating, admittedly, but the fear goes. But it's a recognition almost. Okay, there's something I need to. There's something that I'm doing that needs to be done. And I guess you get to a stage that you can acknowledge your sensations, and you begin to know what to do in order to respond to them. You almost get an instinct of what the appropriate course of action should be. And it's, it might just be, okay, in this moment, I need to lie back on my beanbag and do nothing. And, doing nothing is an option. Sometimes it is the right thing to do sometimes. And don't be afraid to sort of have a day when you don't do anything, because maybe that's your body's way of saying, actually, that's what I need in that moment. Something else as well.
It doesn't have to mean anything other than today I needed some rest. What gets people into trouble, Chris, is when they make stories like, oh no, if I rest today, that means I'm back to square one, or I'm never going to get better. And it just means, okay, you're a little tired today. Cool. So then you'll resume tomorrow.
Yeah. So let's go on to words are important. Talking about sensations rather than symptoms, for example. But also in the way that people, the things that people will say, the doctors might say to you, oh, you're only going to be able to manage your sensations rather than we can actually resolve them. Yeah. It's the way that people talk to you and validate you. People can say things and it can cause it can really upset you and cause great distress. So, there are people who don't really understand or get what your problem is because they can't see anything wrong with you. Or, phrases like you're making it up or there's nothing wrong with you. Those kinds of things can really get under your skin and really cause distress. I think don't try and do too much when you're recovering. It is another one. Is you may find, we talked about earlier, that you see multiple therapists and you end up with a really long list of things that you think will help. But in trying to pack them all in say a morning or a day, it actually adds more stress rather than picking one or two that you think actually this will help. So in my case, I've stripped it back to the first thing I do in the morning is I'll open the curtains, let natural sunlight in, and I'll pick a piece of music that I like to listen to, and I'll make for a mug of warm lemon water, and I'll stand in my Supergirl boots at the window, just give myself a contemplation, a chance to sort of get my thoughts together for the day, sort of thing. And the other thing it does as well, particularly sometimes I'll put the whole outfit on, sometimes it's just the boots on, but I'll notice that my body starts to change insofar as the posture changes. And when the posture changes, it sends a signal to my brain that's confident, and that in itself is a mindset change, and that helps to turn the volume dial down on sensations. And I think, what else have I got down here? Be patient with the process, and especially with yourself, I wrote down. Try things. Sometimes they'll work, sometimes they won't, but you'll settle on the best 2 or 3 things that will actually boost your recovery. So it might be cold showers. They might, sometimes you try it. They might not be right for you at the time. It might be 6 months down the line before you try those. But it's a case of sometimes chopping and changing. It might take you a while to find the 2 or 3 things that really help you in that moment. Have a morning routine, but don't get angry or frustrated with yourself if you don't. So if you've got things on your to-do list, or say you're doing Steady Start and you've written goals down in Steady Start, and say you get to the end of a week and you've not managed to achieve some of those goals.
And Steady Start, for those who don't know, that's the guided program that I have. So it's based on exactly the same stuff we talk about on YouTube. There's no hidden surprises, secrets there. I tell everyone everything, but Steady Start has a weekly schedule. It walks you through, like, holds your hand step by step by step, exactly what you need to do each week. So that's just mentioning that in case people don't know what that is.
So I think this is one that's come up in our Dizzy Brits group, that sometimes people are not sure if they're doing the right thing, or they feel like they're not doing enough, or
yes.
Are they? Is there something they're not doing? And I've learned that I've put down, know that whatever you're doing in that moment is the right thing that you're doing. If you're resting, it's because your body needs rest. And I think I said it before, doing nothing is an option, because sometimes it's the right thing to do.
So, Chris, I'm going to translate what you just said. Self-trust. I think that's the takeaway. It's the right thing to do, because what you're actually trying to get at here is build trust in yourself and your ability to take care of yourself.
So absolutely. Yeah. I think that helps a whole sense of self-care. And we talk about self-care a lot, and it is a skill. It is something that takes a while to, because you can think to yourself, well, I am doing something that's self-care, but I'm not getting better. But it's something that you just have to keep building over time, I think. Don't be afraid to get in touch with your inner child. That's something else that I clearly have picked up. But I mean, that was at the core with my work with Pippa, was working with a broken inner child.
Yes.
And my little Supergirl is front and center of my recovery now. She goes pretty much everywhere with me. She sits on trains to me. She sometimes gets her own seat. Within my own family, they were a bit worried about what does a grown adult look like carrying around a plushy doll. But I mean, she features it at Andy's Man Club, which is a group for men that I attend, and she's a bit of a star of the show there now as well. And
that's what I was referring to earlier when I said you're being more yourself, right? So it wasn't just, we're going to empty a bunch of stress out of the bucket and magically that cures you. There's a double process happening. As the stress comes out of the bucket, there's more room for you to be you in your life.
And I think, when I went to the cinema the other day, dressed as in my Supergirl outfit, and I'm walking around the centre of Manchester on a Friday evening where there's no event going on, so there's no reason why anybody else would be.
Supergirl.
And people were taking a few photographs or selfies, and it raised a smile here and there. And the concerns that my mum had that I might get beaten up by some random, but that never happened. It just cause everybody just smiled, and I just seemed to really connect with people, and it actually made me feel more confident, and that feeds into the sense of it turns the volume dial down in the dizziness, because you feel more like your whole self.
Bingo. That's exactly it. I know we're gonna have to close pretty soon here, Chris. So, what do you have? A few more you wanted to share?
Yeah, Pippa would kill me if I didn't mention this one.
Okay.
Feel your feelings and allow yourself to get emotional. I've got this one down.
Pippa, you listening? We'll make sure she gets to listen to the entire thing so she can hear you say that.
Yeah. If you're on your own, you need to cry. You don't have a shoulder to cry on. A plushy pal or two really helps. A number of times I've cried into Supergirl, I've lost count of now, but I mean, she's been my kind of my sort of mascot and sort of inner child best friend and all the rest of it. So I think as well, this is a message that gets shared a lot on your YouTube channel, is especially if anybody's new to your channel, is know that you're not alone and that you don't have to face neural circuit dizziness alone. That's really, really key. I mean, the creating that Dizzy Brits community, the WhatsApp group. And
for people who don't know, it's a group. It's kind of a subgroup of our coaching group. We have a coaching group, and then our whoever wants to from that group ends up joining this group too. So you have extra support during the recovery.
It works really well with the time difference, because obviously we're in the UK, and most of the posts are probably 7 or 8 hours different. So if we need immediate help at 7 o'clock in the morning, somebody else is more or less going to be able to answer more or less straight away. So that really helps as well. And I think it is easier getting the right help. I think awareness of neural circuit dizziness is growing. So I'm noticing, a doctor said to me only the other day when I was in A&E, that what you're experiencing is real. So my doctor was validating what everything I was telling you. So validation, that is key for anybody you speak to, that they validate how you are feeling in that moment and what you're experiencing. Validation of your symptoms or sensations to you is really important, to have people who will do that. I've also got on here as well, I've been using ChatGPT as part of my therapy recovery. And I've used it as an extension of AEDP. I would say that has helped me enormously with some things like my story writing and my creative side. Definitely explore using AI, but I would say nothing beats a therapist who will support you. So use AI, but use it alongside a trained therapist, because
and don't use AI to obsessively talk about symptoms. Just have to put that in there.
Yeah, exactly. And having positive distractions, and the power of music as well. One of the things I'll probably end on this one is I have found that certain pieces of music I would listen to. My vestibular physiotherapist, 2 years ago, she recommended that as I was venturing back out into the wider world, to get yourself a pair of noise cancelling headphones. But she said, use them to sort of disconnect from outside, but listen to some music if you feel that would help. And I have discovered certain pieces of music. There was one in particular by an artist called Mary Amber, and it was called When I Get My Superpowers, and she was dressed as Supergirl. It was a music video, and this was probably this was one of the first instances when I noticed. I would sit on the train with a hot chocolate in my hand, because the hot chocolate was a warm distraction. I would sit and watch the video when I get my superpowers, and the lyrics in it were speaking to part of my brain, and I was so connected in that piece of music and lyrics in the whole video. And I remember, as I stopped the video, noticing that I was completely symptom free. I had no sensations whatsoever in those moments, and I've increasingly discovered. So that became a habit, a ritual, and I would play that piece of music, and I found others as I went along, and I sort of built a music library of tracks and videos that
it helps you connect back to this sense of safety.
Back to that sense of safety and that sense of self.
Yeah.
And I think the whole discovering the whole superhero theme has been front and center. And you know, having a plushie that gives you pleasure and makes you happy and all that kind of thing is huge.
Yeah, but whatever anchor. So for people to take away, if you're not into plushies or you don't have that, you know, that creative side to you, it's about finding what anchors you and what anchors you in who you are and what makes you feel actually safe. And Chris, this was just a delight and a privilege. You shared so much useful information for people, and also, again, just such a harrowing story, especially at the beginning when we were talking about symptoms. So for everyone, if you have questions for me or for Chris, please drop them below in the comment section. If you're on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe to the channel. If you're here on YouTube, you might be listening to this as a podcast. I would very highly suggest checking this one out on YouTube, because Chris had a costume change that you're not going to want to miss. And you can also follow the podcast, give us a high star rating. These things also help us reach more people. So thanks again to all of you for listening, and especially to you, Chris, for sharing and for being part of my work.
I forgot to take the glasses off when I did the costume
You
change.
It was clear. It was still clear as day that you made the costume change. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris. We'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.